The Cleveland Guardians have one big thing in common with 3 of the 4 remaining teams in the Major League Baseball playoffs. If they lean into that one thing in 2026, they can get back to the ALCS.
Tanner Bibee of the Guardians, and you're listening to Locked On Guardians.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Happy Friday here on Locked On Guardians, October 17th. And this is Locked On Guardians, your only daily Cleveland Guardians podcast covering your Cleveland Guardians from the majors, the minors, the draft, and everything in between. We always say it, it's our favorite half hour of the day. We hope it's yours as well. And we're happy you're here along with us today. I'm Justin Lada, one of your 2 co-hosts. Jeff Ellis is off today, so it is just me. But I've been co-hosting the show with Jeff for the last 3 years. Proud to do so, and proud to be here with you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And I've also spent 18 years covering the Cleveland Guardians minor league system, where I have uncovered, or I should say observed, a lot of the Guardians' strength that I'm going to talk about on today's show. Also want to make sure we shout out all of our everydayers. Thank you for making Locked On Guardians part of your daily routine, your first listen today and every day, wherever it is you get podcasts, YouTube, all those places you can get all your audio podcasts. All right, on today's show, we are going to talk about why the Guardians must lean into starting pitching more. I know it sounds crazy, but we're going to talk about it today. We'll talk about how they've won more with less in the past and why that could be a benefit. And we'll talk about over-management and more trust of the starting pitching staff. So before we get into all that fun stuff today, I'll let you know today's episode of Locked On Guardians, of course, brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Right now, if you're a new customer, you can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the FanDuel app. Download the FanDuel app today. All right, it's no shock. You know, we talked a lot about the Cleveland Guardians. They are the starting pitching factory. And I would argue that in 2025, they did one of their best jobs ever as the starting pitching factory. I would say, I won't go as far as to say they're as good as the run they had from 2014 to 2018, or let's just say 2017. Obviously, those are the 2 Corey Kluber Cy Young years, but they produced a pretty good crop in 2025, and I would say it's even deeper than it was back then. And the Guardians have to lean into it more. This is the identity of the team. I said it during the regular season. I know I played a lot of videos when the Guardians clinched the division title and came back from 15 and a half games up or down over the Tigers. Yes, that did happen. Yes, we're still going to mention that on this show because it happened and it matters. But I said, if they're going to get back into it at all, I declared them dead. But if they were going to have any chance to win this year in 2025, it was going to be the starting pitching, having to bring them back into it. They went out last offseason and they made it a priority to add pitching depth. So that's why they got Luis Ortiz, who no longer is part of that depth. Probably. I don't know. We talked more about the gambling situation on Thursday's show. You can go back and listen to that. They went out and got Slade Ciccone. They went out and got John Means, who might be a part of the rotation in 2026. We'll talk more about that on today's show. They made a concerted effort. They also got Josh Hartle, right? Michael Kennedy. Now they have Cal Steven in this system, which is good. And then last year they brought back Shane Bieber, thinking he'd be part of the rotation. He wasn't, and it turns out they really weren't a Shane Bieber away from anything. It was hitting. We'll talk more about that in the second segment. But the Guardians need to lean more into their starting pitching in 2026. Now let's look at the playoff teams that are out there, right? Let's start with the Dodgers. The Dodgers have a terrible bullpen. Terrible. And they are going to be going back to the World Series. They're up 3-0 on the Brewers. And I know the Dodgers' strength is not necessarily the rotation. They've got a really deep lineup too. And let's be honest, they've been able to buy their depth, right? They went out and they bought Blake Snell. They bought Yoshinobu Yamamoto. They bought Tyler Glow. They traded for Glass now and extended him. They bought Shohei Ohtani, right? All these guys in the rotation. It's not a homegrown rotation at all. Yamamoto, I guess you can say, was here, but Kershaw is not in the rotation where he's in the bullpen. They don't have anybody left in this rotation that was part of a homegrown rotation, but they're leaning into their starting pitching because it's good. The bullpen's bad and it's working. That's a reversal of what we see in the playoffs, right? A lot of people say bullpen, and that's what we saw from the Guardians in 2024. And that worked out until they got tired in the ALCS and got exposed. And we'll talk about more of that on today's show too. But the Dodgers, who weren't even a first round bye team, by the way, they lean into their starting pitching. The Seattle Mariners, they won their first division title since 2001. They had a first round bye. For years, they have leaned on their pitching development. Now, they did go out and trade for Luis Castillo and extend him. Good for them. But Logan Gilbert, George Kirby, Bryce Miller, all homegrown arms. They've been relying on these guys, developing them for years. They went out and they added some bats. Obviously, they traded for Naylor at the deadline, but they developed Cal Raleigh. They traded for Randy Arozarena. They traded for Josh Naylor. They traded for Suarez again, who they once recently had. But they were built on starting pitching, and they've leveraged it. And they even used it not by choice in the 15-inning affair with the Tigers, who, by the way, lost that game and couldn't score a run for I don't know how many innings. Yes, I'm going to keep poking at the Tigers fans because, you still lost in Game 5 this year, so you didn't go any further than you did a year ago. I know the Guardians didn't, but, we're just going to keep being petty here. The Mariners, though, had to use Luis Castillo. And, I didn't even mention, Logan Gilbert had to come out in relief in that game as well. Again, not by choice. They didn't want to do that. They had to do that. It was the only way it worked. But they developed those guys, and they were there. They were able to lean on them. The Blue Jays, now this is not a homegrown rotation by any means either. They signed Kevin Gausman. They traded for Shane Bieber. They have Max Scherzer, who's throwing back the clock a little bit in Game 4 out here in Seattle. Chris Bassett was a guy they acquired. Now, they did draft and develop Trey Yesevich, and 1 year he's up in the major leagues, pitching in some really big games. They have, Jose Barrios, who they traded for. There's different ways to do it, but that is a really strong rotation. And I know they went out and they got George Springer, right? They have Vlad Guerrero. They had Bo Bichette. They traded for Dalton Varsho. They've taken some ex-Guardians and made them useful. We'll talk more about that on Monday as well. But this is a team that's leaned on their starting pitching. Now, the one team they don't have as much in common with starting pitching is the Brewers. The Brewers are on the verge of going home, unfortunately, because they are without starting pitching. They have Freddie Peralta and they have Quinn Priester, who they're treating like a bulk guy instead of a starter, because they don't have Brandon Woodruff right now. And they had Tobias Myers and Jose Quintana and Robert Gasser in the bullpen. They didn't have the starting pitching depth this year. They're similar to the Guardians, obviously, in payroll, market, and just how they do things overall. But this is not a team built on starting pitching. Like, they put Mizorowski in the bullpen, who was great in Game 3 until he wasn't. So the Guardians and Brewers don't share that as much as you'd like, or as closely as it would have been, even though I like the Brewers and I'm sad to see them going to go home. But 3 of the 4 teams, the Guardians have something in common with. They all have good starting rotations. They all have deep starting rotations. And the Guardians, theirs is pretty much homegrown, right? And not that matters. It matters just how good it is. Forget how you get there. Just get there. Gavin Williams, Tanner Bibee, drafted, developed here. Parker Messick, drafted, developed here. Joey Cantillo, they traded for as a minor leaguer, and they developed him further here. Slade Ciccone, obviously, they traded for him. He was, very raw and still is when he got here. So it wasn't like it was anything new, right? This is a homegrown rotation for the most part, home-developed rotation. And it was really good at the end of 2025. It was a big reason why they got into the playoffs, and it was a big reason why they had a chance to win that series against the Tigers, and could have won it in 2 games with better defense or better hitting. It was no fault for the starting pitchers, but there is a fault on somebody else, and it's not Slade Ciccone in Game 3. I'll talk more about that. We'll talk more about how the Guardians need to lean into starting pitching a little bit more, how they've won more with less, how they can overcome those issues but not ignore them. And we'll talk about how they need to overmanage less, overcoach less, and trust their starting pitching and what that means on the rest of today's Locked On Guardians. Today's episode of Locked On Guardians brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Every day we make decisions because we're forced to, because we are adults. But on Prize Picks, being right can actually get you paid. I don't know about you, but I want to be right, and I want to celebrate it. So don't miss out on the excitement of football season with Prize Picks, where it's good and pays to be right. Really fun and simple to use things on Prize Picks, and makes it more fun to watch football. So Josh Allen, whatever he's projected for, you can pick on passing yards more or less a Saquon Barkley touchdown, more or less what his projections are, and you're in the game. And one feature I don't see anybody else doing besides Prize Picks is the injury reboot feature. So if your player leaves the game early and doesn't return, it's not going to count against you. So go ahead and take that injury risk player, high risk, high reward, and know that it won't count against you at Prize Picks if he leaves. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, where it's good to be right. As always, thank you for making Locked On Guardians your first listen today and every day, wherever it is you get podcasts. Shout out to the everydayers. I really love about the show and our fans and the people who are part of the community is that we have people who listen who aren't even Guardians fans. Kian, who's a Tigers fan, who I know probably did not enjoy the first segment of me needling the Tigers. Team Big V, who's a Cardinals fan, who tells me all the time that the Cardinals are enjoying Rob Serfolio, who is the ex-Guardians player development director over there. We've also got obviously great Guardians fans who are part of the community too. We love that. Make sure you're hitting the bell on YouTube so you get episodes regularly into your feed whenever they're posted, especially bonus episodes like the Austin Hedges signing. And who knows what else might happen when we do those kind of episodes as well. And then you can auto download on all of your audio platforms because we're available pretty much everywhere. If we're not, let us know. We can get there. And we also would love to have a new Apple Podcast review too. That helps us share the show, gets it up in the rankings, more people find it. And if you know a Guardians fan who's looking for more Guardians talk, tell them we're here 5 days a week and we're talking about all sorts of things Guardians, and especially starting pitching. Now, we talked about the one thing the Guardians share with all these playoff teams, minus the Brewers, unfortunately, in their situation, is the starting pitching and why the Guardians need to lean into it more in 2026 to get back to the championship series and hopefully the World Series. And that doesn't mean they can ignore hitting. Because I know there's going to be comments. I know there's going to be people who are saying, dude, they got to hit. They have to hit. They were terrible. This is one of the worst offenses ever to make the playoffs. And you're right. You're right. And even in 2024, they were a mediocre offense. It wasn't a great offense. It was mediocre. It was enough because you had a good bullpen. And if you got a lead to the bullpen, you were going to win most nights. And they almost did most nights in the postseason, except for when they made errors. And yeah. And you had Juan Soto and Aaron Judge, all those things. So it doesn't mean you have to disagree or disregard hitting. But I do think that I don't want to buy in so much and say, let's just trust the kids. I know some people are going to comment. I know, Dave Wendell, I know he's a big fan of the farm system. He's a big believer, and I'm a believer in it too. I do believe that Chase DeLauder can hit major league pitching if he can stay healthy. I do believe in Travis Bazzana when he gets up here and gets acclimated. I do believe that Juan Brito could be something close to the Jorge Polanco that the Mariners have. I'm not saying right away, but eventually, hopefully. It took years for Polanco to get there too. I'm not saying you want to have an outfield of Quan. We talked about this on Wednesday. I'm not saying you want to have an episode or a outfield of Quan, DeLauder, and Valera, and then plug in a Lane Thomas, and all of a sudden you've got at least 3 outfielders who miss a ton of time all the time, and another outfielder who can't make it through a whole season with solid production because his body wears down. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying I do believe in those hitters. You have to supplement them, and you can't count on them the way you can count on the starting pitching. So they do have to go out and they do have to supplement the hitting, whether that's somebody at second base for a rental or a shortstop 1 year or something, or trading for getting, obviously the Guardians already talked about identifying offense and outfield. So we'll see what they do with that. Somebody to go along. Jeff and I do have one target we want to go after in free agency. We'll talk about that in a future episode. So stick around for that. I believe our insiders already know who that name is and a couple other people. But the point is, the Guardians have made the playoffs with bad offenses, right? The offense was not good. It did just enough in September for them to go 20-7 to run down a playoff spot. It wasn't just catching the Tigers, right? They overcame the Astros. They overcame a couple other teams in the wild card race that were around with them. So they didn't just overcome the Astros struggles, or I'm sorry, the Tigers, the Astros too. The Astros didn't make it for the first time since 2016. But the Guardians the last 2 years have been in the playoffs with offense that was mediocre at best. And by the time they got to the playoffs in 2024, Jhonkensy Noel until the home run against the Yankees and David Fry, they both struggled. Fry had a couple of home run, or had a couple of hits in the Detroit series. Lane Thomas hit that home run. That was largely a team that was, pretty mediocre on offense. Things had gone well at the time. They had Manzardo that was good. So they do have to supplement the offense. I'm not saying ignore it. But what I am saying is every team has a defining characteristic. You have something every year that defines your team. And this year for the Guardians, now we went all season talking about what is the defining piece of this team? What is the thing this team could have hang their hat on, or what's the backbone of the team? And all year, they didn't really have one, right? They were poor defensively early on. They were poor offensively most of the year, or if not all of it. And early on, the starting pitching wasn't that good. The bullpen had its blips and its issues early on. We waited for the closer, who will not be named, to come out of an April funk. And then he was great until he wasn't allowed to pitch. And the bullpen still was able to thrive despite that. They had their hiccups when Cade Smith had to take over at closer. He had a couple blown saves. This team, though, did not have an identity for a long time. And they didn't really have it till the stretch run of the season, end of August into September. And it was starting pitching. They didn't, they called up CJ Kafis. They called up George Valera. They added some guys to the lineup from the minors, right? The offense, Bo Naylor was up and down. The offense wasn't the backbone of this team. The defense was good. It got better as the year went on. It certainly got better with Rocchio at second base, Arias at short. Jose got better. Obviously, he was a Gold Glove nominee. Santana, Gold Glove nominee, although he didn't make it to August here, or the end of August, I should say. The bullpen survived the loss of a future Hall of Fame closer because the starting pitching was good, because they were going deep, because they weren't allowing runs, because they trusted their starting pitching. And that's what we talked about that in September. The reason the Guardians had one of the best bullpens in the month of September in baseball is because they had the least amount of innings pitched in September, because the starting rotation had the most innings pitched in September. That's not a coincidence that the starting pitching led baseball, or led the American League in innings pitched, and the bullpen led the league, or was up there in ERA and fielding independent pitching, but was at the bottom of innings pitched, and they were both good units. That's not a coincidence. Those things are, that's a situation where there is a correlation. You're not burning down your bullpen as much. They're still good arms. When you use them a little bit less, they're a little fresher. They're better, even when they're a man down, even when, they didn't have Nick Enright, and, Tim Herron wasn't Tim Herron, and Matt Festa was forced to pitch in more than half the games he was on the team for, because you had a 6-man rotation. That was genius, by the way. I'm not saying that's going to work all the time. I know some people are saying, should they do it next year? Because of roster sizes, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. You're going to be short in the bullpen. It's very hard to do. I'm not saying there's not times you can't do it if there's a stretch of games coming up, but consistently, it's not a good thing. And I know I'm saying the Guardians need to lean into starting pitching a little bit more. That's not what I mean. But it was a stroke of genius that they did that, and it worked out great. And it's still a good move, and it didn't work out because you were preserving innings for a lot of these guys who were coming up against it. That's what allowed them to save their season, was starting pitching. And it was the 6-man rotation. But it takes 6 good pitchers. You have to have Tanner Bibee finally finding his level. You have to have Gavin Williams coming into his own. You have to have Slade Ciccone pitching some of his best baseball. You have to have Parker Messick coming up and having a great rookie season. Logan Allen being more consistent. You have to have Joey Cantillo finally finding his stride a little bit. You have to have all those things come together. So the Guardians have proven they can get into the playoffs and do more with less. That doesn't mean they don't need to address the offense. They absolutely do. We talked yesterday's show. They have to address the bullpen in the offseason, because Cade Smith is probably the only guy you feel really confident what he's going to be able to give you in 2026. And I say that as a Hunter Gaddis, fan of the person and pitcher, and not really 100% sure how it's going to go. I still think he's going to be good, but I don't know how great he's going to be. And starting pitching is not going to be linear. I'll talk about that next segment. We can't count on the starting pitching to be linear, and that's why they have to lean into it more and have depth. And that's what's going to take them back to the ALCS in 2026, I believe. So we'll talk more about that on the rest of this episode of Locked On Guardians. Week 7 of the NFL, it is underway, and FanDuel has an ongoing offer you want to take advantage of. Do not miss this while it lasts. Right now, if you're a new customer to FanDuel, you can put just $5 down on any bet on the app. And if that bet wins, you're going to unlock $300 in bonus bets. I keep telling you, this is the best deal we've seen from FanDuel, and I know it can't be around much longer, so you want to get in on it now. Unfortunately, I said that the Brewers were not a good pick for Game 3. They lost. They're not a good pick for Game 4 either. Mariners, Blue Jays, who knows what's going to happen in that series? I'd be very careful with that one. You got Kevin Gausman going for the Blue Jays, so I think they could end up taking the lead in that series. As far as the Browns and the Dolphins, well, the Browns are still giving up 2.5 points, but the over-under has slid at 36.5. I told you to lock in at that 40 because I knew it wasn't going to go that high. Everyone's shifting that way. You could have got in on that sooner. But what are you waiting for? Don't miss out on another good opportunity. Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app and get started. If you like your baseball talk, and I know you do because you're here with us, you're here with us every day as part of the Locked On Podcast Network. After you're done listening to Locked On Guardians today, head on over to our friends over at the Locked On MLB channel. You can listen to Sully talking about the playoffs and breaking down all the stories in Major League Baseball, both in the playoffs and off the field. And you can catch MLB Game Night. We've got a rotating cast of very entertaining hosts, in my opinion, who will break down every playoff game, and they'll get insights and on-screen reactions from the local hosts who live and die with this team, their teams every single day, and they're covering those teams every single day. The only way we can do it here on the Locked On Podcast Network. So you can get all the fun insights that you can't get on a national scale with a little more passion and insight with Locked On MLB and Locked On MLB Game Night. All right, so let's finally talk about this overmanagement thing and why the Guardians need to lean into starting pitching more. And that includes trusting their starters a little bit more. The one thing I think you've seen, and we've talked a little bit about the data on this show, is that overexposure for relievers has become a problem, right? The last couple of years. Now, the data is a little bit noisy on that, as smarter people than I who break this stuff down for a living as well, or not a living for me, but it's a living for them, and they've said it's noisy. Now there are arguments too that it's not noisy, that there is kind of a correlation. It's not necessarily a guaranteed one, but it's a theory by people, again, who are smarter than I. Let's look here at a tweet from Travis Sawchik, who is a native Clevelander, great baseball writer. And he says, relievers become less effective over time the more often they pitch in a postseason series. And if you're looking on YouTube, you look at the relievers year by year going the last 4 seasons, 2020 to 2024, and you got a 321 weighted on base average, which is essentially a weight of all the outcomes a hitter can have, the good ones: walks, singles, doubles, triples, homers, and they're all weighted by the better outcome. Second time through the order for a reliever, second time they've seen a hitter, they're to 300 WOBA. The third time it's 321, almost as high as a starter. Third time a starting pitcher faces a hitter, the WOBA is 323 in the postseason the last 4 seasons. So a reliever seeing a hitter for a third time in a single postseason series is the same pretty much by WOBA as a starting pitcher seeing a hitter for the third time in a game. And we saw that directly happen to the Guardians in the playoffs in 2024 when the Yankees saw an overused Cade Smith, an overused Hunter Gaddis, all those guys. Now, I will say it is noisy because third time the OPS was, somewhere in the 700 range. And it was somewhere around the 700 range in 2024 for the first time for a reliever too. Up until 2023, that was the case though. If you go from 2016 to 2023, the reliever facing a hitter for a third time in the series, the OPS, as we saw, is over 800. The first time through, or in 2020, first time through, it's below 700. And the second time they see a hitter, it's below 700. But the third time it was 800. Now, last year, they were about more even. So it can be noisy. I'll say that right now. But we've seen what the managers have done this offseason, right? Or this postseason, I should say. The Dodgers, like I said, Blake Snell. Remember Blake Snell and the Rays? They were afraid to pitch him past 6 innings, and they lost the World Series to the Dodgers in 2020. Blake Snell just had one of the best starts in the postseason by a Dodgers pitcher ever. And he went 8 innings, had 10 strikeouts, had a great performance. They pushed him to 8 innings. Yoshinobu Yamamoto for the Dodgers pitched a complete game. That's still allowed, believe it or not. You pitched a complete game in the playoffs. Okay, the Mariners, again, they had a quick hook of Luis Castillo in Game 4, and that's what you call managing to the situation. These guys are managing. I'm not saying Vogt's not doing that, but I'm saying you have to plan and have a little more trust in your starters. And here's what the Guardians can do. You know, the Mariners have rode their guys. The Blue Jays rode Trey Yesovich in the first round, and Kevin Gausman. Those guys have been trusted to go deep, and it saved those bullpens. The Guardians have 2 guys at the top they can trust, or they should trust, I should say. You've got Tanner Bibee, who has the contract. He has the desire. He's got the health track record, and he's got the arsenal to go deep into a game. Okay, he's got the guy. He's the guy you want to go at least 6 innings and a start. Gavin Williams, big case for Gavin Williams to be trusted to go deeper in games like he was this postseason too. He is entering his prime, his peak. Now, again, development is never linear. So we know both those guys ended the year on great notes. We thought Bidey was going to take the step forward all year in 25, and he didn't because of a lot of things going on. So maybe he comes back next year and he puts it all together for the whole season. Gavin Williams, we hope he does. But remember, Gavin Williams is a guy who you have borrowed time on, right? He's a Scott Boras client. An extension's not coming there. He'll be traded at some point. But right now, you've got multiple years of control with him left. Ride him in the playoffs. He's a big dude with the arsenal to do it. He took the steps forward this year. He wants that. He has got the playoff mentality and mindset. You ride those top 2 guys, and you get what you can out of them. And then you have a guy like Joey Cantillo who has emerged this year. And then you got John Means. So I think they should pick up John Means' option. I know we've been kind of on the fence about whether or not they should do that, but I think you need the depth. I'm not saying he's a guy you ride in the playoffs. We'll see what happens next year when that happens. But you pick it up because it gives you the depth, okay? Because now you have Tanner, you have Gavin, you have Cantillo, and Slade Ciccone, who basically you can say he was a rookie in 2025 because he was with a new organization, was almost the whole year, and learned all these new things. He goes into the offseason with all that to take with him now. That's a big step for him. And then you got Parker Messick, who, if you have Bibee and Williams and Cantillo and Ciccone, if you go Means at 5, you've got guys like Logan Allen and Parker Messick who can provide depth for you. That's huge. You're not going to get through the whole year without those pitchers, all of them. And then you got Cal Steven who can factor into this as well. So you've got the horses to do it, I think. The biggest part, though, is to have the depth, and you've got to train these guys to go deeper. And they want to do it. No starting pitcher wants to go 5 innings and be done, trust me. And you want to be careful. This team has taken the approach in spring training of wanting to move their guys along throughout the year so they're peaking at the right time in September, which I get makes sense. It totally makes sense. But from the minors to the majors, if these guys aren't conditioned, if they're not taught, if they don't learn through experience of being able to go 6 innings and pitch through this and pitch through that and be pushed, they're not going to know how to do it at the major league level. It's the same as anything else in life. You don't know until you're pushed to do it. You have to get experience. So these guys have to get deeper into games at some point to be able to do this in the playoffs. The playoffs are a different beast. I get that. But you also got to be careful how you manage in the postseason. The one criticism I have of Vogt is, and again, this is coming from somebody, again, who I know Vogt and Carl Wilson know more about baseball than I'll ever know, or they've forgotten more than I'll ever know. But you can see the numbers and the outcomes. The bullpen was taxed. You manage to the game, and that's why Dan Wilson took Luis Castillo out of the game in the 3rd inning because there were runners on. He was getting hit. He was having a lot of traffic. You manage to the game. Your ideal game plan, of course, is to have Tanner Bibee and Gavin Williams go 6 or 7 innings. That'd be great. Even 9. You pitch. You manage to the game. You have a game plan going in, and you say, okay, this is the game plan. we have to react to the game plan. If Tanner Bibee or Gavin Williams is down 3-0 in the playoffs in the third inning and the bases are loaded, yeah, it might be time to yank him. And yeah, if you get to the fifth inning, he's giving up one run, but every other batted ball he's given up is 100 miles an hour off the bat, and it just happened to find somebody. You can use that as predictive analysis and say, look, he got a little bit lucky. He gave up 5 hard hit balls that should have been hits. He got his 5 innings. We're going to get him out of there. You manage to the game. They have more data, more stats, more information than any of us do. They know how a pitcher's feeling. They have to read how he's feeling. They can use data like velocity and spin rate to tell if something's on or off. They can go by batted ball data and they can say he hasn't had a lot of stressful innings or he's given up a lot of hard hit balls. So even though things have been going well for him, the hard hit balls, that luck's going to change at some point. You can manage to that, but you also have to manage the other way too. When a guy's going good, you also got to leave him in there. And it starts with pushing him to get in there. And I also wonder too, if there's too many, like the reason the Guardians should lean into their starting pitching so much is because you have Carl Willis, who everybody considers one of the best pitching coaches ever in baseball. You got Brad Goldberg, who's a rising star. Now, I wonder if they have too many pitching coaches out there. There's a lot of voices in that dugout, so that's a challenge. But you have at least one of the goats of pitching in your dugout of coaching. And Brad Goldberg is considered a rising star. This is just more reason to trust those pitchers and lean into their talents and develop them to be the backbone of the team in 2026. And by the way, this is not any by means guaranteed or is finalized, but I've heard rumblings that there should be a Stephen Vogt contract extension announced sometime after the World Series. So if you're an insider, you already knew that. You can go over and sign up at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnGuardians to get news like that. Ask us questions on our mailbag shows, interact with us day to day, whether it's just talking baseball, getting news, game days, all that kind of stuff, and some bonus content like our monthly insider chats. All right, Jeff will be back with me next week. I know he's going to be in the saddle on Monday solo, but Tuesday we will talk about ex-Guardians in the playoffs. Because I know everyone's been wanting to hear about that, or at least have been griping about that. We'll talk about the identification of talent and the development of talent. Plus, we'll talk about that minor league pitcher, Luke House, that the Guardians signed. That'll be coming up on Tuesday. You'll have Jeff solo on Monday. In the meantime, thank you for spending the last half hour with me here on Locked on Guardians, talking about your Cleveland Guardians. Everybody have a good weekend or good day wherever you're listening to this. Can't wait to talk to you again soon. In the meantime, go Guardians, go. Lean into that starting pitching.